Buying a home is the biggest financial decision that most people will ever make, and you need to do it right. You make money on the buy, not on the sell. Let me repeat that. You make money on the buy, not on the sell. So we are trying to put together a ultimate buy guide for you to go through the process, start to finish, and for you to make sure you're not making any mistakes.
So we're going to start with the big picture and decide, are you actually ready to buy a home? Because there's so many things that go into it where you have to work together with your agent to figure that out.
Yeah, it really does depend. Like, are you ready? Like, I talk to people all the time and they're like, yeah, like I want to move here for 2 years and then I'm going to move to North Carolina. And it's like, oh, but what are you going to do? Are you going to rent the house then? Because that could work. But are you trying to sell it in 2 years? Because that's probably not the best idea. You know, you could catch an upswing and make money, and you could catch a downswing and lose money. So, you know, you really have to say, like, am I ready for the commitment, but also the responsibility?
Yeah, I have clients that say, hey, I want to look at this house. And I, do my realtor job and say, are you pre-approved? Have you looked at any other properties? And, a lot of times the answer is, I haven't talked to a bank yet. I just want to see if I like this house first. And it's like, okay, things move so fast. Are you even going to be able to get pre-approved? And if you are, you're going to be kind of chasing it if things go into multiple offers or sell quickly, which they oftentimes do. So if you're even thinking about it, get pre-approved, and then like what your parameters are, the type of loan, so the type of property you can look at. It's just so important.
Yeah, and I'd say getting pre-approved is the first step. You know, I finding the right realtor is probably the first step because then they have lenders that they can recommend to you. But really nobody can do anything with you until you're pre-approved. And part of the pre-approval too is understanding the payments because you might be pre-approved for $600,000, but you have to understand once you're pre-approved, okay, so if my loan is this much and I put this much down, what's my payment? What's the taxes and insurance? Because people get thrown off by that. I've had people say, "Oh, my budget's 450," and I'm like, "Let's break that down with the lender." And then they break it down, and they're like, "Actually, my budget is now 375 because those are the payments that I feel comfortable affording." And so that's really important. And then something else people overlook is it's not great to go necessarily with a bank as a lender. There are private mortgage lenders that for a lot of people, especially if you're not standard W-2, or let's say, you are now, but you weren't last year, there's better options potentially because all lenders don't approve the same people.
Yeah, there's different loan types for sure. And especially if you're a non-traditional earner, like you mentioned, it's really important to talk to somebody who has access to different types of loan products, or maybe that loan stays in-house versus being sold to the secondary market. So yeah, that's just very, very important to get your financing lined up.
Yeah, and like I had a client last year where he had no credit. He didn't have bad credit. He just had no credit. He's like 35 years old and he just never had a credit card, pays everything off. And we're like, you're not pre-approved because you don't have any credit. He's like, oh, what do I need to do? And he didn't want to buy a house right away. So it was perfect, right? He was kind of thinking about it. So now he got a credit card. He's been using it for a year. We just put an offer on a house and guess what? He got his pre-approval. He's good to go and he'll be fine. But you don't want to necessarily wait till, the umpth hour of when you want to buy either, because you need to know, you need to talk to a realtor, start to understand the market. You need to, talk to a lender, see what you need to do to get pre-approved. Sometimes there's things on your credit report you need taken off and you got to pay those off and build up your credit. Sometimes it's student loan issues. Sometimes it's like, okay, your income is 70 grand a year, but in order to buy the house that you want at the rates, you actually need to make 75 grand a year, right? And then you can then, do all of that. And so it's really good to, and also if you're a business owner, how much you're claiming, right? Like if you're claiming, 30 grand a year, the lender can say, listen, like I need, you gotta stop doing so many write-offs and actually claim more income and pay more tax in order to then be approved next year. And, that's just all part of it.
Yeah, it is. I had clients, it was a couple weeks ago and they didn't want to get pre-approved right away. And they looked at the property. It took them another week or more to get pre-approved. Well, in that time, even though the property had been on the market for a while, the weather's nice, things got warmer here, multiple offers, and they were still dinking around with getting their pre-approval letter where they made an offer, but unfortunately it wasn't the best offer. And they almost got mad at me. And it's like, look, I told you multiple times, get pre-approved early on. So they ended up losing on the house that they really liked because they didn't really want to go through the process in case they didn't like it. And so it was just so frustrating where it's like, okay, well, I did everything I could, so now you're back to square one.
Yeah.
And it happens.
It does. It happens all the time, and the biggest thing I'd say for, especially you first time buyers, but any buyer in general, you have to have the right team. Like if you're relocating from out of state, anything like that, you need the right team, and it's super, super important and the right realtor, and this is why the realtor is such an important aspect, should have a great team behind them. Like I have my go-to inspector. I have a couple go-to lenders. I have like my go-to, quote person, like say the pool needs resurfacing. I have my go-to HVAC company, because you want all that. Because if you're just hiring some random HVAC company, you don't know, are they telling me the truth? Is this a thorough, inspection?
Yeah.
So you have to really look at everything and have a realtor that has a great team.
Well, and the cheapest option isn't always the best option. You really have to rely on them for the team.
Oh my God. If I can tell you, so my inspector is probably a couple $100 more than your average inspector. However, my inspector is probably 50% more thorough than the cheaper inspectors, right? And if I could tell you how many times buyers are like, hey, this seems a little expensive for the inspection. We actually want to go with this other guy we found online that'll do this for like $300. Okay. But the inspector is supposed to find issues with your property, and you get what you pay for. So your $300 inspector is just writing it off, have a good day, thank you, where my inspector is going through every little thing, and he's calling, you're going to need a roofer, you're going to need an HVAC person because this isn't running quite right. Very thorough. And I've even bought deals myself where, I had this deal I bought, it was under contract with somebody else, it fell out. So then I put it under contract, I get my inspector, he's like, needs a new roof. And they're like, no, the last inspector didn't say it needed a new roof. He goes, I don't care. It needs a new roof. Like, look at all this, all these issues. And so I got it credited for a new roof. And that's what people don't understand is like the negotiation power comes from the inspector if you're the buyer. So you want somebody really thorough because that is your power to then get things paid for.
Exactly. And I always do, it's kind of a slippery slope. I do like to remind buyers that an inspection is not a fix-it list for the seller.
Correct.
Especially if you're competing. It's just important to mention that. However, if you don't hire a good inspector, they're not going to find anything. And then you run into an issue a month or 6 months down the road, you're screwed.
Well, and that's the thing. It's not a fix-it list. So it's not like, hey, the cabinet door is creaking or, but if it's a roof, an HVAC, pool resurfacing, things that are legit, very expensive issues that could come up in the next 1 to 2 years. You don't want those missed, like mold. Like there's so many things that people can miss if they're not doing a good inspection. And that's why, you have to really trust your inspector. And that's why you need someone that has a great one that you can then, be referred to if you don't have one that you love. But I always just find it interesting. Like I had a client, he fully waived the inspection because he did not want to pay for an inspector.
Yeah.
I tried. Crazy. I was like, it's $700. Like, just do it. Yeah. But he's like, no, I don't. I'm fine. It looks fine. I'm like,
in our area, they're around $350, which is, it's all relative, right? But it's money well spent. If that $350 saves you from buying a house that's a money pit or needs 20 things fixed, then spend the damn money.
I know, right? It's like, you want to spend that money on the front end. And I was never a fan of people waiving inspections, and I've never waived one because to me, I'd rather actually pay more for the property and do an inspection because, if a buyer is going to pick a lesser offer with no inspection, a seller, a lesser offer with no inspection, then there might be stuff that they know is going to pop up. Like if I know that I have a bad HVAC system, I know I don't want an inspection because it's going to be a $15,000 fix. So, you have to think about that too, is like, what are sellers not, stating that the problems that they have, right? Because you're not doing an inspection. So you kind of open yourself up for the fact that you could have problems. And I know we saw that a lot in 2020, 2021, but I do not recommend that.
No. One thing we see in our area, and I'm curious if you see it in yours, there's a clause where it's like, hey, if a buyer's making an offer to a seller, the buyer says, hey, we want an inspection, but it's for major items only, like,
Mhm.
over $5,000. If anything is less than $5,000 per occurrence or per item, we're not even going to mess with it. We just want it for our peace of mind that there's nothing major wrong with the house. So that is one way that it's like a happy medium where the sellers know that this buyer is not going to nitpick everything on an inspection, if they're competing on somebody without an inspection, but it still gives that buyer peace of mind that, hey, nothing major is wrong with the house. So
Yeah, and in Arizona we don't really have a form for that, but we do put on, will take as is. The thing is you can put will take as is and then you can still ask for things fixed. So
yeah,
I always put will take as is in certain situations, but then talk to the listing agent and say, listen, it's as is unless there's a big issue. If there's a big issue,
yep,
but here's the thing, if there's a big issue, you're going to have that issue with everybody,
yep,
like I had a or a buyer last week, we did an inspection, we were taking it as is, but we found out the bottom of the shower leaked and was all cracked and the whole thing needs taken out and replaced, right?
yeah,
You're either going to take a major hit on the offer price for the
yep,
next buyer because you're going to have to disclose that and they're going to find it anyways in the inspection either way. And so of course,
yeah.
they credited us money to fix it, but we would have taken it as is. So in Arizona, yes, you can say that, but then you can
Yeah.
still ask for whatever you want repaired.
Well, and I think what you said is really important with you said you talk to the other agent and good
Mhm.
agents communicate and good agents can decipher and discuss what a buyer's intentions are or
Mhm.
seller's intentions, depending on what side that you're on, which is worth so much. That's why it's so important to talk to somebody that knows what they're doing, that's experienced, and that has ran into things like this before.
And that is one of the bigger things is, if you have an agent, you need to make sure that they can communicate. Like, can they communicate with you? Can they communicate with the other agent? Because, so many times I try to call listing agents and they just say, just send over the offer. Just send it. I'm not going to talk to you. And the problem with that is they're not selling your house. They're just having us send an offer and then we just wait and we just see what happens. And that's not really good for either party because, when you can negotiate, like I had an agent I was working with the other day, they want 625. My buyer is going to submit 600. I called him and he said, listen, submit it. We're only 25 grand off. We'll probably be able to figure out a way to meet in the middle or work around the prices, right?
Yeah.
But that's nice because now he knows we're submitting six. He wants 625. He's aware my client doesn't want to pay more than six. I'm aware his client doesn't want to lower 625. So
Yeah.
him and I can then work together to try to meet in the middle somewhere, right? And
Yep.
the beauty of that is like he's willing to talk, right? A lot of people just say, just send it. I'll just send it.
Yeah.
And that means, okay, so you're going to sell them on my offer or present my offer without knowing anything about me, my buyers, my offer. I don't know what your seller wants. Maybe they would rather do a long close or a quick close, or, maybe, if we take their furniture so they don't have to move it out, that would be a benefit to them. There's so many random things, but you're just like, send it and I'll talk to them and I'll let you know. And that's not a good agent. That's a cocky agent that grew up in the days of COVID when there was 7 offers. Because here's the other thing. If they decline the offer, now that house still sits because it's been listed for 60 days. And we might have been able to come to some agreement. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like maybe we wanted to buy the furniture and maybe there was something in there that, that could have been benefited. But if they just say, send it, you'll never know. So that's a big flag for me. Like, and I don't know necessarily how to ask that when talking to your agent because you don't really know what they're doing. Like you really don't, especially on the listing side, like you have no idea what they're doing. So, but it's a big one. Like if they're not communicating and maybe as a buyer you ask or as a seller you ask, okay, tell me about these people. Tell me about this offer. Tell me about the situation. And if they don't know,
think that's really
that's because they didn't talk.
Yeah. That's really smart as a buyer to ask. If your buyer's agent should be asking, but as a buyer, you can still ask your agent, like, what are the seller situations? Do they need to close fast? Do they need to stay there for 3 months? Whatever the case is, those are all things to negotiate.
Yeah, so maybe that's the right answer. Maybe if your realtor should know everything about the seller, and if you're selling your house, your agent should know everything about the offer the buyer presented and the buyer. And if they don't know, that's not a good sign.
Yeah. And I think sometimes there's things where it's like, okay, I know that the seller wants to close quickly, so I'll talk to my buyers and, throw out like, hey, I know the seller wants to close sooner than later. And it's not always I'm talking to, how do I say it? I don't tell the buyer, hey, I'm going to call and ask these questions. I've already gotten that information and I'm already talking with the buyers to craft an offer that is the most competitive, along with price, of course, is paramount, but then everything else, all of the rest of the terms can often make or break an offer.
Yeah. And let's talk about what the buyer wants, because I think that this is huge. And also, what they want and what's realistic. And I think that that's a big one. I think that as a buyer, no house is going to be 100% perfect. Yeah. And it gets confusing when you're sitting there like, do I offer? Do I not offer? Do I buy? Do I not buy? I like it. Do I love it? It's really hard to make these decisions so quickly, And I think that part of that is knowing your must-haves and knowing your must-not-haves. And they're really important because it's just like dating. You just know these are the things I have to have. So if it doesn't have that, it's just out. Like, you want a balcony, it doesn't have a balcony, you're never going to like it, right? You want a certain area, it's not in that area, you're never going to like it. And then things that are deal breakers, like I don't want stairs. Okay, well, if it has stairs, it's out, And so that's going to help clarify it, because if it has all your wants and it doesn't have all your don't wants that are in your top, let's say 5, then it probably is a home you would be happy with.
Yeah. And that's actually what I ask my buyers. It's like, okay, I know you have probably 10 things on your list of what you're looking for. What are your top 2 or 3? Like, what's really important to you in a home? How do you live your life? Do you like to entertain? Do you need that big dining room? Or are you more about the master bedroom and the master bathroom? Like, what's important to you? And let's find that so we can take a list of, 50 homes in the area and dwindle it down to like 6 that we go look at or whatever, which I wish we had that many listings right now, but we're short on inventory. Yes, it's no secret.
Yeah, exactly. Well, not here in Phoenix. I went and looked at 14 houses this weekend, 14 condos with a girl, but we found a great one. But let's talk about that when you find a great one. So I took her out. We looked at 14 things, and about showing 12, it was the perfect thing. It really was. Yep. So the thing is, and I always tell my buyers this, you can back out for the first 10 days for any reason. You have to give a reason, but you can back out. So don't wait to make the offer if you think you need a couple days to think about it, because it can sell. And for people that are very picky, they might have already looked at 10 or 20 houses over the course of 3 months, and they finally find one, but they need a minute. And I get that because it's a big purchase. But you also can you can make the offer. And if you decide the next day that you're not even interested, you don't even have to go through with the offer. You don't have to deposit your escrow money. I mean, it's not what I recommend. Most of the time, people go through with the offer. I've only had a couple situations where they've offered and then a couple days later backed out. Like, typically that does not happen. But so many times they have not offered and somebody else buys it. So
that the 10-day rescission for the HOA is kind of where you're coming from, correct?
Well, in Arizona, it doesn't have to be an HOA. So in Arizona, you have 10 days for any reason. It has to be a material reason, but it can be too loud. It can be you didn't notice that something, the door was smaller than you thought. Fill in the blank. Yeah, it's like they're not going to push back on it. And you have 10 days here. So it's like you don't even have to get an inspector out for 5. You know what I mean? So you have time. Yeah. Like, you don't have like a week, but you have a couple days where you can think about it before the inspector is going to come out, and you're going to start being out of pocket, right? And so I always tell people, like, just make the offer and don't wait, because so that's something, especially with first-time buyers, that I see a lot of. Investors usually kind of know their buy box is pretty defined. But, it's that emotional decision of like, I love it, but do I really love it? And it checks all my boxes, but am I sure? And I get it, but other people are looking, especially if it's only been listed a couple of days. If it's been listed like a couple months, yeah, you want to give yourself a few days to think about it before you make an offer. However, you don't want to give yourself an infinite time to think about it because it's still going to sell if it's a good property priced right.
One of my major investors and friends that buys a lot of properties, it's the tell phrase. You snooze, you lose. And it's so true in real estate. It's like if you think on it or want to sleep on it, it may or may not be there the next day. Or maybe you wouldn't have been competing and now you are. So it really is a snooze, you lose kind of market.
Yep, it really is. No matter how slow you think it is. And a lot of times I have buyers, it always goes back to the one they missed out on. I like this, but not as much as I like that one, and I can always tell when someone loves something. And I am the first, and you should find a realtor like this. I'm the first to tell someone, I don't think you love it. Like they'll be like, well, maybe. Yeah. I'm like, but you said you wanted a patio. Doesn't have a patio. Or you said it didn't want stairs and it had stairs. I know, but I think I do kind of like it. You don't love it. Move on. Like we're going to find something better. But it's when I walk in and they're like, has everything they checked off. They love it, but they just feel like, what if I love something else more? Like that's the one you need to act on because if it checks all your boxes, you're not going to love something else more and you're going to miss out on it. And that's what you really like that missing out on it is like, it affects people. Like they hold on to that for a long time.
And some people, I found some clients have to miss out on something and learn that like, okay, if I don't act on something that I like, I'm going to miss out and it hurts.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, and it doesn't mean you have to buy the next house you find, but then the next time you find a house that you actually truly like, then write a meaningful, good offer that's competitive, and then maybe you'll get what you want,
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big hurdle. But I always tell people, like, don't be afraid to make an offer. Like escrow doesn't even open till the next day. So like, like you can sit on it overnight, or sometimes these deals, as back and forth take a couple days. Like you'll have time to think. Just write the offer and then think.
At least you're opening that dialogue back and forth. You're opening the conversation,
Exactly. So let's talk about, you write the offer, you get it under contract, and now you have the inspection period.
Yeah.
So sometimes clients, so it's funny, there's good and bad to getting a really good inspector. The good is they're going to catch big things. The bad is they're going to give you a list of a whole bunch of little things, and it can be very overwhelming for a buyer.
Yeah. What I tell my buyers is, hey, don't be alarmed. Even in a brand new house, brand new construction, you are going to find things that will need to be repaired or addressed. No home is perfect, no matter how new or old it is. So heads up, there will be stuff. And right then, I think, it's like, okay, mentally prepare yourself to find something. But then what's normal versus what's concerning is really where it comes into your agent, your team, so to speak, of service providers, because they're going to be like, well, this is only going to cost $1,000, where a buyer might think it might cost $5 or $10. It's like, no, that's not a big deal. Buyers add zeros to things. They sometimes think that things cost more than what they actually do. I see that so often because, you're planning worst case scenario. You want to be proactive and, conservative on things. But then if you're too conservative, you're never going to get a deal done.
Well, and also not everything that the inspector points out is even relevant or needs fixed on your timeline, right? Like, we just bought something. It doesn't have a range hood. Of course, you're going to want a range hood to get all the smoke, but it's not urgent. If you wait 3 months to get a range hood, it's not. So it doesn't all have to be like, and before I move in, I have to give the handyman this 100-page sheet of all the things to fix. It's like you literally go through it, and I go through it with my buyers of like, okay, here's what's urgent. You need to fix it right away. Here's what's, you're going to want to fix it eventually. Yeah. And everything else, like if you fix it, you fix it. If it bugs you, fix it. It's fine. Like you hear so many things. Like the big one is like the shower glass to code is supposed to go all the way up to the ceiling. How many showers do they not go all the way up to the ceiling? It comes up on most of my inspections, and they're like, do we have to fix that? And I'm like, it's been like this for like 20 years. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's technically.
If you replace it, sure.
Yeah, if you replace it, sure. But also, do you want glass all the way up to your elevated ceiling in your shower? Probably not, because the steam will get trapped in there. So yeah, like it's code, but it doesn't mean you have to do it, you know? And it's like, you know, if the fire, the fire notifications are old, like, yes, you're gonna change those, right? But it's not, or smoke detector or whatever. I can't think, but it's
fire alarm, smoke detector.
Yeah, whatever. But it's not like you just switch them out. It's like easy. Like I have a handyman because, you know, if you hire someone, a realtor that has a team, I have a great handyman. He's $60 an hour. You know what? He can bust out all this in 10 hours. It's $600 for all these things, you know? So those aren't big deals. And that's just cost. I mean, listen, it's cost of ownership. Okay. Like if you're not willing to pay $600 to a handyman, like get used to it because stuff breaks. But if you have, like I had a cracked shower, if you have an HVAC that needs, you know, fixed, these are bigger things that it's like, yeah, you got to fix that. Yeah, you got to credit me. Those are big issues. Those are issues that if they don't credit you, maybe you walk away from the deal. You know, the shower's leaking. This is going to cost me $5,000, and you get a real quote. You don't just make up a number. It's going to cost me $5,000. Like, what are you going to do about that? And it doesn't mean that the seller has to pay for all of it either. They might meet you in the middle. Like on my shower deal, like she's paying $3,000 of the $5,000, right? So like my buyers are still out of pocket too. She's paying $3,000. It's not necessarily a full write-off either.
Right. Well, and it's like the seller doesn't owe you something brand new. So if that shower was older and still operational, but it's leaking, it's like, okay, maybe that is a fair trade because you knew it wasn't going to be a brand new shower to begin with, but the only way to fix it is repair, you know? So it does make a difference. And so splitting is very common when something comes up like that.
Well, and here's what I think that buyers need to understand is that if you go into, you know, you have your inspection and you have your list of things you want fixed or repaired or whatever. If you give them the full list of every little thing or some ridiculous amount, they're going to say no. And then you just paid for an inspection and you just paid for an appraisal, which we'll get to, and you just paid for all these things. So you as the buyer are out of pocket for this. And you just sent the seller a $15,000 itemized report on all the things you want fixed. Well, they're going to say no, most likely. So you need to be strategic about what you ask for. So let's just use the shower situation as an example. So my buyers, you know, we had a $5,000 shower issue. Nothing else. They're taking everything else as is. They said that they didn't care if she didn't pay for any of it. They're still buying the house. That's what they said to me. And I said, well, let's see if she'll pay for $3,000 of the $5,000. Because I think if we ask for the full $5,000, she's going to say no. And if she says no, then now she's irritated with us and we're less likely to get any. And they're like, that's great. If we get anything, it would be a bonus. So we got $3,000. So I had other clients like a year ago where we inspected a house and they decided that they wanted to turn a minor pool repair, which would have been like a couple grand, into a full pool resurfacing, which was $15,000.
Wow.
And of course, I mean, I could have told you before we even wrote it, and I did tell them, but they didn't listen, that they're going to say no. So then they said no, and then they're upset because they're out at the inspection and the appraisal, which is expensive. It's like $1,000, you know? And I get that, but you have to be realistic as a buyer. Like, you know, you can't, if you send this huge bill, it's going to be no. If you are reasonable, then you have a shot at negotiating what you want.
Yeah. And I think it's important because one thing that I do with my buyers is, okay, if we're going to request, let's just say there's like 8 things that need to be addressed. We'll say, okay, let's ask the seller for these 4, but let's tell the seller, hey, there was these other 4 things. We are going to handle these after closing at our expense. We're just asking you for this. Even though it seems like a lot, it's only half the list or less than half the list of the must-do items. So that's a way to do things too.
you want to be win-win, nobody wants to get, this railed over, right? Like you as the buyer don't want the seller to say, I'm not going to give you any money. It's all on you. You got to fix it. You are going to say, pound sand, I'm walking away. But they also don't want, hey, we have a $15,000 handyman list of all minor repairs. And, that's what we want you to, the wall's green in the living room and we want you to paint that white. And we want, they're going to say, no, pound sand too. So at the end of the day, you want to be reasonable to get what you want. You're asking for the right amount to get what you want. You want to ask for what you think you can get. And then maybe even slightly more, but you don't want to ask for some crazy amount because they're not going to come back and say, well, you want 15 grand, but actually I'll do 5. No, they're just going to say, no, we're moving on. I don't want to waste any more time with you because my house is off the market and you're like killing people looking at it. So next.
Yeah, you're dinking around and wasting time, and time is money. So be realistic with your request. And it's not saying don't ask for something, or on the sell side, it's not saying don't agree, but at least be realistic and lean on your realtor, or inspectors or whatever to figure out what is realistic in your specific situation.
Exactly. So let's talk about, okay, we get through the inspection, and getting through the inspection is huge. If you get through the inspection and you come to an agreement after the inspection, most of the time you're going to be closing. So that is like a big relief for a seller. It's a big relief for a buyer. It's when everyone can breathe a little bit and start moving forward. Because I always tell people, don't start moving forward on things till we get through the inspection. Like don't, start trying to buy another house as a buyer. Don't start canceling your rental agreement somewhere. Like let's get through the inspection. And then most likely we're going to hit closing. But we're not guaranteed to hit closing just because we got through the inspection. So let's talk about the loan, because that is the biggest thing after the inspection that then has to process.
Yeah. So after the inspection is done and that's all negotiated, then oftentimes we will let the lender know, hey, the inspection's done. We're good. Let's order the appraisal. And usually that's a pretty quick process. The bank is the one who orders the appraisal. You as a buyer do not do that step. The bank has to order it themselves. And then, if the appraisal comes in good or at value, usually it comes in close to the purchase price, typically if something's actively listed on the market. If it does come in low, there's a chance that we have to contest that value if we feel like it is worth it, which, there's a small chance of that happening. But if you have a good team, you can work through that. So
well, here's what's interesting about the appraisal, because my clients always want to know, especially my sellers, and my buyers too. What did it appraise for? Like, what did it appraise for? And I'm like, it appraised for what you're buying, the buyers are buying it for, because the bank does not, the appraisal need to be in a certain frame or else the bank's going to send somebody back out. So if the appraisals are too high, they're like, well, this house is sold for $350, but the appraisal came back for $420. What's going on here? We need to send someone back out, or vice versa. Yeah. So they'll appraise them low if they're not worth it. Don't get me wrong. But if they're too high, they're going to most likely appraise for the price that they're selling for, like almost to the T, or like maybe 5 or 10 grand above, because nobody wants the bank to then have to send somebody else out. It's almost like, you don't want to be questioned as an appraiser, right? Like, why did you appraise this so high? Is this right? Because they're questioning you. Where if you just appraise it for the price it's selling at, everybody is happy, unless it's too low. But it's like, if it's too high, it's not hurting anybody to make it the right price.
But then I've had it where the sellers find out, oh my goodness, it appraised 5 grand higher. We left 5 grand on the table. And I'm like, no, we didn't. It was actively marketed. We had multiple offers. And if it appraised lower, then you would have to reduce your price. So that is perfect. If something comes in within 1 or 2% of your sale price, that's exactly what we're aiming for. You did not leave money on the table. We negotiated the best offer, So that's always a kicker too. The sellers are, wanting the exact purchase price to be the appraisal price, and it doesn't always happen that way. In fact, it rarely does.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing too is, your earnest money typically is contingent on you being able to get lending. So a good realtor is going to be on top of your lender to make sure, we're getting loan status updates every Friday. And you want to start doing that like 2 weeks, like right after the inspection period. Basically, you want loan status updates because you want to make sure you're closing on time, and your realtor really should be keeping up on that. And also kind of piggybacking your lender. Like, where are you at? Have they done this? Because you as a buyer, you don't know. You're just waiting for them to ask for stuff. And getting everything back to them in a very timely manner is your responsibility, because we do have a deadline, and it is a tight deadline, and you have to get everything back that they need.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, if it appraises low, then you're going to have to renegotiate in order to move forward. So even before those loan updates come along, if a house does appraise low, the seller can do, or the buyer can do one of a couple things. That buyer can say, hey, we changed our mind, we walk away, we can't get financing. Or they can go to that seller and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, your house appraised for $10,000 less than what we're under contract for. So you need to lower your price 10 grand. Or it's one of those things where you meet in the middle again. It's like, we love this house. It's unique. There's not a lot of comps, but we want to move forward anyways. We'll split the difference. You drop the price 5 grand. We're going to bring 5 grand cash to closing to fill that gap of the financing and call it a day. So I have seen that too, where sometimes buyers are okay if it appraises low. They still want the house. There's just no comps to support it because it's a unique property.
Yep. I've seen that too, and it's also good, to be on your lender to make sure you're going to be closing on time. And a lender can really screw this up, which is why you want to go with someone that your realtor recommends, ideally. And a bank is the worst at this, by the way, because they work Monday through Friday. I remember I had this client that worked with a bank. The girl went on vacation for a week. Apparently, she's the only one that can work on the loan. So we literally had to wait a week till she got back to do anything. And so that's the issue with banks. Not a big fan of going through banks, but I know people do. But just make sure that
we have a lot of great local banks where it's like, would they have to check their email after hours? No, but do they? Yes. So it is. But it's locational and it's relational. Like, so know who you're working with, and, don't go to like Rocket Mortgage or some Google a mortgage online and, click on the first thing that you find. It's like, do not do that. Please, for the love of God, do not do that.
Exactly. So, okay, let's assume, inspection goes good, appraisal goes good, you got the financing. Now we're moving on to closing. So the day before you close is typically when I do it, but we do a final walkthrough to make sure that the property is in the same, shape as when we initially saw it and made the offer.
Yeah. So what are your items that you look for on a final walkthrough?
I make sure there's no water anywhere because I get so freaked out about water. So I check, and I'm up there with my little iPhone light, just making, because it's not always the best lighting depending on the house, making sure I don't see any stains on the ceiling. I'm opening up all the cupboards. I'm making sure nothing's dripping. That's the big one. And then beyond that, mainly, visual. I'm just walking around the property, making sure nothing looks awry, making sure if they said there's a washer and dryer, there's still a washer and dryer there. There's still the same washer and dryer, because I've had people swap out their brand new washer and dryer for an old pair, that was included in the, offer. So I always, in the refrigerator, same. So I always look for those things too. How about you?
Yeah. To add to that list, I always, flush toilets. It seems like a silly thing. I'm always turning on the water to make sure it gets hot, that water heater is working before we go and sign documents. So those are a few additional things. And then, here we have a lot of basements. So looking for any leaks or anything that might look awry, like you said. Sump pumps, one time I did a final walkthrough and the sump pump had quit working. So we had water in the basement on closing morning. So that was fun. We managed and we got it closed, but the buyers and sellers had to work to an agreement.
Yeah, and you can delay closing for this, right? So if there's something off on your final inspection, that's why you sign it saying you walked it, you're good. And, but that's the reason, right? Is because you want to make sure that whatever the solution is, you come to the solution. So I guess as a final takeaway, what's the biggest thing that what's the biggest piece of knowledge you wish you could give buyers?
I would tell them, if one piece of knowledge I would give them is to do their research, ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because you don't know what you don't know. So it's impossible to give one tip. So I guess it's kind of a catch-all, ask a lot of questions. There's no question that's a dumb question.
I agree. And I'd say the other one, the one for me would be choose your realtor very wisely. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a realtor. I'm saying that because it's a huge, huge thing. It's going to lead the drive on everything else. It's going to lead the negotiation. It's going to lead your ability to ask questions and get answers. It's just, it's going to be the catalyst to everything. If you have a bad realtor, then unless you really know what you're doing, you could be in a bad situation, you know? And so, and you have to trust that realtor like they're your friend. Like you have to be able to say to them, like, I hated that house. Like, you know, we saw 10 things today. I didn't like any of them. You have to be that honest. Like you don't want to feel like if I don't like one of these 10, she's going to get mad if she has to take me out again. Like, you know, not that kind of vibe, you know? So that's my biggest thing. It's just really, because your realtor's the main person on your team and they just have to be great.
Yeah. I think that is huge. It's like you should be comfortable with, I hated this, or I loved this, or why the heck did we look at this house? It doesn't have XYZ. It's like, okay, great. Then we find out what you like. So I always tell my buyers, any feedback is great feedback, whether it's positive or negative or generic or specific. I want your feedback. You're not going to hurt my feelings. The more that you tell me, the more I can help you.
Exactly. So, well, and if you guys want to check out our guide, Tara and I made a first-time buyer's guide, and it is located below.